Hey guys, how's it going? This is the Bald Metal Nerd coming at you with another awesome vid. And in this one, I think, honestly, it's kind of now or never if I'm going to do this video. Basically, what this video is going to be is I'm going to be doing an in-depth comparison of emulation of a couple of different sources. I'm going to be testing out the NES Classic, the SNES Classic, up against a Raspberry Pi, as well as PC emulators, okay? Because Nintendo just recently announced they're going to stop producing these micro consoles, so it's kind of, you know, if I don't produce this thing now, this is very quickly going to be an extremely irrelevant video. So if you want to get these items, go get them. You know, so I'm just going to say that real quick. But that's not what you're here for. So what I'm going to do real quick, guys, just after this intro here, is I'm going to pause, and I'm actually going to show off controller differences between, you know, I'm going to compare the NES controller to an original NES controller that I no longer have because I actually sold off all my original NES stuff since I didn't have a working console. I'll be comparing an original SNES controller to this one and this. So that's the next part of this video, so stay tuned for that. And then after that, we're going to jump into emulation. So I'll see you guys in a little bit. Alright guys, here's the portion on the controllers that I, promised in the other part of the video, and I figured I would start with the controllers for the regular NES since I have fewer permutations of those than I do of Super Nintendo controllers. On your left there we have an actual original vintage NES controller, and on our right we have the controller that came with the NES Classic Edition. They're pretty, obviously, on first glance, they look pretty identical. Obviously, well, we can see this one has some yellowing plastic, and of course, we know about the ultra short cable on the NES Mini one, but we're not going to complain about controller length. That's been kind of beat to death. This is just a side-by-side comparison so you guys can see pretty much what we're looking at here. Now, as far as the texture of the plastic, on the outer casing of the controller, this part here, the plastic is actually a bit more smooth. So I don't know if they used a different material on the original than it is on the new one. So they do feel slightly different holding them, not gameplay wise. Now I did compare these like and I dropped the one controller. Now this may or may not be super obvious on camera, but if you look at the button depth, the D-pad, this is the original, it sticks up slightly higher than on the Classic Edition. This D-pad taller than this one as far as how far it comes up from the controller. As far as the A and B buttons go, they seem to be the opposite. They seem to stick up slightly higher on the NES Classic Edition versus the original. Now, this could just be down to very slightly different plastic tolerances, and who's to say that, this is going to be universal. Your copy of your original versus your NES Classic might be different, but as far as how button feels go, I also have to keep in mind I'm comparing a brand new controller to a vintage controller. So what do I think, quote, feels better? Well, I of course really like the feel of the buttons on the original one, the D-pad and the A and B button. The D-pad feels really good on the original, and the A and B are kind of spongy and springy, whereas I feel on the Classic Edition, the A and B button are tighter, but I don't like the D-pad as much as on the original, because the D-pad is tighter than on the original, whereas I kind of like having a slightly looser D-pad because it makes it easier to do that type of movement than it is on the NES Classic Edition. Now, if I was not comparing these directly side by side, I probably, to be fair, would not notice any of these differences. It's just because I have them right next to each other and I'm, being ultra anal retentive, comparing them down to every detail. So that is the NES two controllers, NES Classic versus Vintage. So now we are going to do a comparison. This is a vintage SNES controller, but we're going to compare that last. We're actually going to compare to what I would call new SNES controllers that I have. Now, this one isn't brand new. I've had it for maybe, I don't know, a couple of years. So it's not nearly as vintage as my vintage. And this is, of course, the one that came with the SNES Classic Edition. This, of course, is just a standard USB gamepad. And this is what I use if I want to play an SNES emulator on my PC. So, I mean, at first glance, it feels great. And I would recommend this controller for anyone, honestly. It's still widely available on Amazon, easily obtainable. I would highly recommend this controller to anyone who wants to play NES or SNES games on their PC. Because obviously you can use this with NES games as well, and it works great for that. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. We're comparing feel. So, which do I think feels better? Well, let's compare the D-pads here. I like that, that slightly springy D-pad. This one's more tight, definitely a lot more tight. Let's test the L and R buttons. Those are nice and tight. Those are those are definitely springier, but I like them in different ways. I think I might actually slightly prefer the feel of this on the L and R buttons as well. Let's try the face buttons. And of course, the SNES Classic has the actual concave and convex, and those are much tighter. So this is overall much tighter than this. I actually kind of like the looser feel of this a little bit better. Now let's test that up. We have an actual vintage one here, and this is actually tighter. Feeling it, this is tighter than this USB one. So even though this is older, it's still tighter. It must be made with like tighter plastic tolerances and all that. So let's just compare the vintage to the SNES Classic. So we're looking at the vintage, rocking the, yeah, this one's a little bit looser, probably because due to age. The SNES Classic, after it gets played enough, may just eventually just be like this vintage one. Basically, as far as tightness goes, this is kind of halfway in between this and the SNES Classic. Now, let's look at dimensions, see if we have any, buttons or the D-pad sticking up any further. I'm just going to do a very quick cursory look. It looks like the D-pad on the Classic Edition actually sticks up a little bit more. And as far as the face buttons go, yeah, it's kind of the opposite of the SNES Classic. The D-pad on this, on the Classic Edition, sticks up further, but the face buttons on the Vintage stick up further than the SNES Classic Edition. Whatever. That's pretty much it for this portion. On to the next part, after I knock my camera around. Alright guys, it's time to go ahead and jump into those gameplay tests. I'm going to be starting with NES Emulation, and I'm going to be testing out two games. One game that literally everyone on Earth has played, and a second game to test lag and all that. The first test that I'm going to be doing is JNES on Windows, obviously. So let's go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and load up a ROM here. Let's see, did I do Mario Brothers recently? Yep, okay. So let's go ahead and we're going to do Mario first on JNES. I did, by the way, try to set all of these to, pixel perfect on the PC emulator. PC, NES Classic, and the Raspberry Pi. So obviously we're starting off with the PC. So let's go ahead and get into Mario Brothers real quick. And I'm just going to do a quick run through of World 1-1. That's a bit loud. Let's turn that down a little bit. Get it down to a better, lower volume. Okay, let's see here. It's not easy to play with the camera kind of in my face there. I can tell you that playing this, it feels slightly, because I spent some time with the RetroPie and the RetroPie and the NES Classic Edition. Jeez, oh Pete's, I can't even talk here. And I can tell you that this feels slightly off to me in comparison to those two. At least in this game. Yeah, it's definitely off. It could just be also the fact that of the way I'm sitting as well. I guess I'll find out when I okay, so and the audio's off, but I think that might more have to do with my might have an audio cable loose or something, because I have some RCA cables running into my receiver from a DAC rather than an HDMI source, so sometimes they can work their way loose. But I'm not here to play all the way through Mario Brothers, so let's go ahead and load another ROM real quick. See how it does. Now, JNES may not be the best emulator for PC. It's just the one I'm currently messing with. So let's go ahead and we'll do some Mega Man 2. And I'll let you guys judge for yourself if you think there's any lag. So I'll try to let you see the controller as I press a button corresponding with the on-screen action. I tell you, it feels fairly smooth, but maybe slightly off. Okay guys, I think that's going to wrap it up for NES on my PC. Yeah, again, I think that audio cutting in and out, I think that more has to do with my audio setup than a problem with the emulator. That wouldn't surprise me if one of those cables worked its way slightly loose or something. I can adjust that later. Plus, maybe one of my speaker cables is... whatever, that's an issue I have to deal with later. So, anyway, we're going to jump over to the next source now. Okay, and this is a Raspberry Pi running Recalbox, which is basically the same as RetroPie, but I just like the UI on this one a bit better. And I have this basically set to pixel perfect mode, all that stuff. So let's jump in real quick. Do Mario real fast. Do I have the right buttons? Okay, there we go. The Raspberry Pi feels better. It feels more responsive to the commands. More precise, yada yada. It feels better. Now, as far as which one looks better, that's of course going to be up to your subjective taste, but I think the Raspberry Pi is doing a better job than the Windows emulator, honestly, in this case. It could be down to the emulator, and you know, I'm sure that's what it is. I'm sure it has nothing to do with hardware platform, but that's the way I see it. So let's go ahead now and let's try some Mega Man 2. Alright guys, leg test. Again, this feels smoother, more accurate. That's just the way I see it, so whatever. Let's go ahead and switch over to the NES Classic now, which of course is the main event and kind of why we're all here. At least that's my assumption. Alright. I guess we're just jumping right into Mega Man. Actually, let's go ahead and do Mario real quick. Where is that? Super Mario Brothers. And yeah, this is going to take a little longer to navigate because it's hacked and it divides it up into folders. There we go. Now, how accurate does this feel? Probably about on par with the Raspberry Pi. Maybe slightly better. I don't know. I mean, it feels really good as far as accuracy goes. This is set to pixel perfect mode. Now, I know the lag has been analyzed on the NES Classic pretty extensively. And by the way, I'm not running a different emulator core. I'm running whatever the stock emulator is with the system. So I have nothing, I haven't changed it to RetroArch or anything along those lines. So this is whatever emulator Nintendo developed for the console. All I've done is hack it to, let me load more ROMs. I haven't made any other changes to the system whatsoever. Alright, gives you an idea of Mario Brothers. We'll take a quick look at Mega Man 2 now. Oh, come on. Sorry, I got all confused there for a second. Oh, I forgot to do the lag test for you guys on this one. Oh, I apologize. So here we go, right? Let's do it real quick. Now, it feels pretty responsive to me. I'm sure there's lag, but because it's been well documented. But I'll tell you what, I don't think the average person is going to notice on this setup, honestly. I think as far as which one is my favorite between the three, I think I like the color palette of the the Raspberry Pi the best. I think it looks the most vibrant, has the best colors. My second favorite is the NES Classic. I think it looks great. And as far as gameplay feel, which one do I think has the most accurate gameplay, right? What has the smoothest gameplay? I'd say it's a toss-up between the Raspberry Pi and the NES Classic, but maybe there's a slight edge to the official NES Classic for me. Hard to say. I think I'm probably not using the best emulator for Windows, so I've tried a bunch of different ones, and I know there's a million options out there. If somebody in the comments wants to leave below what their favorite NES emulator for Windows is, feel free. That way maybe I can find something a little bit better than what I've been using. So that's it for this part. We're going to go ahead. I'm going to pause real quick, and I'll pick some SNES games to benchmark, and we'll be back to do that. See you guys in a little bit. Okay, guys, here we are with... we're going to be doing SNES emulation now, and we're going to be doing, we're going to do two games. You see the second game we're going to be doing, but I'm going to go ahead and switch to the first. That way you guys can see it. We're going to do two games, just like we did before. And the emulator we're using on Windows is, of course, SNES 9X, which is the most common emulator that people use for sure. So let's go ahead and fire up. We'll start with Mario World. we'll just run through the first level of the game real quick. As jeez. Try wasn't big, I didn't have to duck. Whatever. How's the gameplay feel? Feels pretty good. Now, I haven't extensively played the other one side by side, and I'm not doing well. I can't tell if it's slightly off or if I just suck. I'll know a little bit better once I play on the other consoles. Alright, there we go. We got our fire. I don't know why I'm narrating. Alright, that gives you an idea of that game. It's alright. So let's go ahead and make sure get rid of that title bar there. There we go. Go ahead and configure the controller the way I like it. Why am I on player 2? What is the deal? Okay. That's odd. I wonder if one of the inputs is not configured correctly on my controller. Let's try here. We got back, forward, up, down. Huh? You win. Round 2, fight. Alright, the next one we'll do a little bit of a leg test in the next match. Let's go ahead and do a quick jab here. Obviously, I'm able to pull off special moves. Leg, if there is leg, it's not something I think an average person will notice, truthfully. Alright, I think we got an idea there of what we're looking at, so let's go ahead and move on to the next gameplay source. And of course, that's going to be the Raspberry Pi. Let's go ahead and switch over to that audio, which is there. Alright. I wonder if it's just under Mario World instead of Super Mario World. scroll up. What the hell is it? This is what happens when you're not prepared, folks. You're like, where did it go? Oh, there it is. Super Mario All-Stars and World. Whatever. Okay. Sorry, you're just getting boring commentary-free gameplay. I think it might be just me sucking. Alright, that's Mario. Maybe it feels slightly better on that than on the Windows emulator, but it's pretty close. Go ahead and set the controls real quick.
You let that dog. Round one, fight.
I have to confess something, guys. The D-pad on the controller I'm using is not as good as the D-pad on the the other controller, so it's a little harder to pull off special moves than it is with like a regular. It's this what I'm using, by the way. Oh, you already saw that in previous. What am I showing you? You already know what I'm using.
You win.
Next, we'll do a leg test because Dulcine will just stand there. So. Sorry guys, I'm getting way too into this. Okay, let's Watch me very badly play Street Fighter. I blame the controller more than I blame the emulator for this one. It's just possibly me sucking really bad. Let's get a little more. If there is an input lag, it's minuscule, obviously. So maybe this does a slightly better job than the Windows PC on the Raspberry Pi, but it's not a significant difference. But I think it might be slightly better. So now, of course, we're going to jump over to the star of this segment, the SNES Classic. Let's make sure we're set to pixel perfect on this one too. Let's do that real quick. Button there. Alright, let's do pixel perfect. There we go. Ooh, let's pick this frame out. I know that's what you guys were here to see, me mess with frames. Okay. Let's go ahead and do some Mario World. Let's see how this feels. Alright, that guys gives you gives you guys an idea of Mario World on the SNES Classic. So let's go Street Fighter. Obviously, the pixel perfect mode on this takes up a lot less screen real estate than what you get with oh, that's interesting. It starts me off a dull seam on the SNES Classic, different than the ROM files I found. Huh, that's different. Anyway, so let's do a few let's see how well I can pull off special moves here.
You win.
Let's also do some lag test here. Yeah. Let's see here. Again, if there is a lag, it's really small. Now, as far as what feels better on this one, it's a little inconclusive, actually. It feels pretty good. Regardless, I'd say all of the sources feel more similar than different with SNES. So again, that's pretty much it for this source. So we're just going to call it a day on SNES. So what I'm going to do, guys, is I'm actually going to pause real quick, come back with the webcam, and we'll do some conclusions on this video. See you guys in a second. Okay, guys. So what are my conclusions when it comes to the various emulator setups? Well, to me, the PC honestly wasn't that great, and I think that had to do with emulator choice rather than obviously any inherent limitations with the PC, because my PC is many, many thousands of times more powerful than either the Raspberry Pi and or these micro consoles. So at some point in the relatively near future, I'm going to make another video comparing some PC emulators. I will probably be comparing RetroArch against what I already showed off in this, as RetroArch is what's running on the Raspberry Pi, and I think the Raspberry Pi overall does an excellent job of emulating the 8 and 16-bit consoles. And if all you have is a Raspberry Pi setup for emulation, you're good to go, pretty much, in my opinion. At least I think this basically, it does a really good job. I haven't tested PlayStation out on this, but I will eventually. So I basically, it'll do a great job on everything from 8-bit up to like PlayStation, from what I understand. After that, it gets a bit dicier with the Raspberry Pi, but overall, it's definitely, I would say, excellent choice for retro gaming. Does a great job. And as for these mini consoles, no, these, if you have a Raspberry Pi setup, obviously these are not what I would call a must-have item, clearly, right? But I'm glad I have these because they are a fun experience. It's nice to see a hardware manufacturer put out really high-quality emulation machines. Nintendo did it the right way, in my opinion. They loaded these down with really good games. The emulation on it is really good. Yes, there might be some lag, but it's not going to be perceptible, I think, quote, to the average person. The average person isn't going to know or care about the emulation quirks with these. And I know there are a few, but the average person, not going to care. Emulation is really good on both of these. And I couldn't perceive any lag, but that's because maybe it has something to do with the fact that I have these hooked up to a monitor rather than a TV, and there's going to be obviously less image processing going on in a monitor. But of course, if you have a TV and you're hooking these up and it's lagging bad, try putting it into game mode, of course. Everybody's going to say that, and that might help. So, but overall, I think these two consoles are excellent. These are the right way to do it. From what I understand, though, of the just recently released PlayStation Classic, I hear there's many issues with that console, so I might stay away from that one. But overall, I really like the Nintendo mini systems quite a bit, and I would recommend them to really any general Nintendo fan out there. And if you want to get them now, because Nintendo has announced they're not going to make them anymore. So I would say, here we are in December of 2018. They're still readily available and easy to get, but I would say come 3 or 4 months from now, say March or April of next year, probably going to be really hard to get your hands on one, and you might have to pay, secondary market prices at that point. And let's just say no to scalpers. So get them now if you want them. Anyway, that's pretty much it. I hope this video was at least somewhat informative and useful for you guys. That's it. As always, if you like this, thumbs up. If you hate me, thumbs down. Share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you guys next time.